Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Our top story: President Trump unveils a new defense system, the Golden Dome. Its purpose to protect Americans from missile attacks, including nuclear threats posed by foreign adversaries like China and Russia.
In the campaign, I promised the American people that I would build a cutting-edge missile defense shield to protect our homeland from the threat of foreign missile attack. And that's what we're doing.
Chinese companies trying to bypass tariffs imposed by President Donald Trump. A report highlights some of the most unusual methods. The trade war between Beijing and Washington taking its toll on U.S. producers too. General Motors now saying it will stop sending some of its vehicles to China. And trade concerns continue to weigh on China's economy. They're prompting authorities in Beijing to take new action. President Trump announced a new missile defense plan capable of stopping nuclear attacks from reaching the U.S. on Tuesday, and China is responding. The defense system is called the Golden Dome, and it aims to protect Americans from attacks by foreign adversaries. This unprecedented project comes amid warnings that China is developing new missiles to threaten the continental U.S.
Ronald Reagan wanted it many years ago, but they didn't have the technology. But it's something we're going to have. We're going to have it at the highest level.
The Chinese Foreign Ministry quickly responded, claiming the dome carries offensive implications versus defensive ones. A spokeswoman also claimed the dome would violate the Outer Space Treaty. The multilateral agreement outlines rules for governing the peaceful exploration and use of space. Trump's goal is to launch the defense system by 2029. He says the project will cost around $175 billion. Critics have pointed to the Golden Dome's price tag, questioning it as a good use of government funds. Despite that, President Trump went ahead and assigned Vice Chief of Space Operations at the U.S. Space Force, Michael Gutlein, with leading the project. Gutlein spoke on possible foreign threats the U.S. could be dealing with. Take a look.
Our adversaries have been quickly modernizing their nuclear forces, building out ballistic missiles capable of hosting multiple warheads, building out hypersonic missiles capable of attacking the United States within an hour and traveling at 6,000 miles an hour, building cruise missiles that can navigate around our radar and our defenses, and building submarines that can sneak up on our shores, and worse yet, building space weapons.
China and Russia have started working together in space with plans to launch satellites and possibly even nuclear weapons into orbit. The Golden Dome is part of a broader push to strengthen U.S. defenses against these advanced threats. That includes ballistic and hypersonic missiles, as well as other next-generation aerial weapons. President Trump signed an executive order earlier this year outlining plans to protect Americans and critical infrastructure from aerial threats. Big names like U.S. military contractor Lockheed Martin and Elon Musk's SpaceX are expected to help build it. The idea is inspired by Israel's Iron Dome, which was designed to intercept short-range missiles from foreign adversaries. Just last year, Israel used it to shoot down about 300 missiles and drones fired by Iran and Hezbollah. At the time, U.S. officials said there was no need for that kind of system here, especially not with neighbors like Canada and Mexico. But now the focus is shifting, with the goal of defending against joint threats from China and Russia, both in space and overseas. In recent years, China demonstrated high levels of aggression by anchoring its naval ships close to the shores of Alaska, Australia, and Taiwan. How are Chinese companies attempting to sidestep Washington's tariff rates? Here are several unusual and irregular methods. Here's a summary of how Chinese companies try to pay less in tariffs or even skirt them altogether. The easiest method is to underreport the value of goods arriving at U.S. customs from China. Alternatively, the shipments could also be mislabeled. Both aim to exploit a simple rule: lower value, lower tariffs. Another method is to avoid tariffs entirely by using a fake company. The company exists legally, but is merely a shell. It works like this. The Chinese company or one of its partners registers a business in the U.S. and receives goods from China. Immediately afterward, they shut down the company without paying the tariffs. Then they open a new company to receive the next batch of goods. It just takes a few $100s and a couple of hours to open a company in America. Simply put, one company is started and stopped per batch. Is there any risks for American companies as the receiver of these goods? David Forg, partner at Chicago-based law firm Barnes, Richardson & Colburn, told CNBC this. He called it a horrible game for the U.S. businesses involved in the scheme. That's because they could end up being held legally accountable for the fraud under customs regulations and other laws. As trade talks between the world's two largest economies continue, General Motors has halted exports of some of its vehicles from the U.S. to China.
The company shared this announcement with employees and dealers for its Durant Guild import business in China. A spokesperson explained that imported vehicles through the Durant Guild accounted for less than 0.1% of the volume it sells in China. In a statement, GM said it was restructuring the Durant Guild and optimizing GM's China operations. It justified the move by citing significant changes to economic conditions. This comes as trade tensions between the U.S. and China have eased a bit. The two countries have agreed to lower levies by 115% for 90 days. But before that, China had imposed tariffs of more than 100% on goods from the U.S. Washington and Beijing are still negotiating tariffs on other trade issues.
Nvidia CEO Jensen Huang praised President Trump's decision to do away with some of the Biden administration's chip export curbs. Speaking in Taiwan at the yearly Computex conference on Wednesday, Huang said the Biden rules cost his and other U.S. companies billions of dollars in sales. The Computex conference is one of the world's largest technology trade shows. The event is held in Taiwan. Huang described the restrictions imposed by the Biden administration as too harsh. And because American-made high-tech chips were blocked from going to China, Chinese companies were being pushed to innovate faster to fill in the gaps. Biden had said his restrictions were necessary to keep China from developing its chip technology. Critics called them too bureaucratic. Huang also pointed to another aspect, saying Nvidia now occupies just 50% of the Chinese chip market, down from a whopping 95% when Biden took office in 2021. The Trump administration said it plans to replace the Biden-era rules with its own version. That's as Washington works to block American know-how from getting exported to adversaries, especially given concerns that the U.S. tech could aid the Chinese regime's military development. Trade fears are hanging over China's economy, and Tuesday saw Beijing policymakers play their latest hand in response, the regime cutting key rates to try to aid its economy and counteract Washington's tariffs.
The country's central bank cut its benchmark one-year loan prime rate by 0.1 of a percentage point to 3%. Its 5-year rate, key to setting mortgage prices, fell by the same amount. Earlier in the day, several of the country's top commercial banks also cut their deposit interest rates. That was seen as guiding smaller lenders to make similar reductions. One economist told Reuters that all the rate cuts are meant to boost lending and stimulate consumption. The moves are part of a package of measures announced before China and the US agreed a truce on tariffs at talks in Geneva. That deal spurred analysts to raise their forecasts for Chinese growth this year, but huge uncertainty remains. Nomura chief China economist Ting Lu said it would still be quite challenging for Beijing to hit its 5% growth target for the year, unless policymakers step in with more stimulus and reforms. Figures out earlier in the week showed new bank loans tumbling and home prices staying flat, pointing again to areas of weakness in China's economy.
Is Taiwan a country or not? This question was brought up in comments to the media from Taiwan's foreign minister. The discussion focused on the tense relationship between Communist China and the democratic self-ruled island.
Whether or not Taiwan is a country is not up to Wang Yi, nor the People's Republic of China to say. The whole world sees us as a country. We choose our governments democratically. It is our business what our name is.
He was also asked what he would say to Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi should they ever meet. Ling said that given the opportunity, he would try to shake hands with him. He said they are both human beings and he would first try to connect on that level. He added that if Wang chose not to accept his handshake, that would be his own issue. The Chinese Communist regime sees democratically governed Taiwan as its own territory and has stepped up military and political pressure to assert those claims. But the communist authorities in Beijing have never ruled the island. Due to pressure from the Chinese Communist Party, only 12 nations worldwide officially recognize Taiwan as a sovereign state. In North America and Europe, only the Vatican maintains official diplomatic ties with the island. Coming up, the U.S.-China trade war remains despite the 90-day truce. What's at the core of the issue, and how should the U.S. approach it? A discussion on those details right after the break here on China in Focus.
The problems they face right now aren't trade related, they're structural issues. That they don't understand what a capitalistic society is and how to be structured. You can't go there, start a business, and then send your money outside of the country. Who would want to go there and invest? The way people get money out of the country is fascinating. You know, there's all these different schemes.
Welcome back to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. A 90-day truce in the middle of the U.S.-China trade war, but that doesn't solve the core problems that sparked the standoff. What are these problems exactly, and how should Washington approach them? To discuss, we spoke with Jonathan Pelton, author of Wireless Wars, and Brad Good, author of The China Blueprint. Brad Good, John Pelton, thank you both so much for being here.
Thank you.
Good to be here, Tiffany.
Now, both of you actually have books talking about your experiences being in China and then the threats they pose, very different. Of course, John, you talk about Huawei especially, and Brad, yours is more of a biography, and then you have solutions at the end. So on that note, given all the headlines right now about the U.S.-China trade truce, if you will, for 90 days, there's a lot of focus on the economy and the economic changes happening there. Brad, I want to start with you because in your book you talk about seeing China before and after it joined the WTO. What were the biggest changes you saw with that?
Well, interesting that you mentioned China joining the WTO, because everyone expected the Chinese government to liberalize after joining the WTO, and they didn't. Everyone was wrong. Instead, China started making and producing a whole bunch of goods that they sold to America. And so I think that there's a misunderstanding when it comes to China and when it comes to trade and them sticking to agreements. They never do stick to an agreement. So I'm hugely skeptical.
Now, on that note, John, actually, you were in China trying to get your telecoms company in, and you're trying to compete with the Chinese competitors who could bribe others. Talk to us about your experiences navigating that type of a market.
Well, one thing that China learned very quickly was that the old internal methods that they used to follow would lead to companies like Great Dragon, which was the national champion telecom company. No one's ever heard of them, or at least not anymore, because the idea of just taking your clients out for drinks and out on the town, giving them subpar equipment, really doesn't work when you've got companies like Lucent and then Ericsson and Nokia in there. So China definitely woke up to the idea that you had to make competitive equipment. The rest of the world wasn't playing that game, even though there's always some degree of that. They realized they had to do research and engineering. This is why Huawei really did stand out as a successful company. They realized needed to actually make products if he was going to be selling on the world stage.
Now, staying with you, John, you talk about China's obsession with brand names. That was something you were able to leverage to then kind of get into that market. Talk to us about that, the way you leveraged that, but then also the fallout from that and what we lost.
Well, you have to remember that if you don't believe in the sanctity of private property, and communism doesn't really believe that, intellectual property really falls into that same category. So they're not going to be much as far as safeguarding it. But I remember when I was there trying to compete with other companies that were paying bribes and we brought in Harvard Business School and had them teach how to do acquisitions, how to do purchasing of telecom equipment. We brought in the executives from the carriers. They appreciated the brand name of Harvard. They got certificates with Harvard's name on it. And we were able to build goodwill for helping educate them and giving them that kind of an edge. But when it comes to the protection of brands, the protection of intellectual property, people wonder why China's so bad about it. It's the essence of communism, is there is no private property. It's never going to be convenient. The government's going to take a hold of.
Now, Brad, when it comes to some of the major differences between, what we think of as economic indicators here versus China, you talked about, your own studies and trying to figure that out, and then eventually there was something known as the Li Keqiang Index. Talk to us about the opaque nature of China's economy from back then and even now.
Li Keqiang Index, this is the vice premier, created his own index instead of using their GDP figures of like the train and the electricity used. They don't even rely on their data. And this just is an indication of the country being, I think, poorly mismanaged, and then being fearful of other people knowing about the country. And I think that's endemic. That's perpetuates throughout the whole country. It's a huge issue. It's part of China's problem that they face. The problems they face right now aren't trade related. They're structural issues that they don't understand what a capitalistic society is and how to be structured. You can't go there, start a business, and then send your money outside of the country. Who would want to go there and invest? The way people get money out of the country is fascinating. You know, there's all these different schemes. I think one mentioned in the China blueprint was someone I know, this is just a few years ago, created a consulting company in Hong Kong, hired his own consulting company, and then paid his consulting company huge fees as a way of getting money out of the country. And you just can't have a country run that way where people are so worried they have to go to those lengths to get money out. It just doesn't work. So the problems China is facing right now are massive.
Given, the opaque nature of the way communist China conducts business, it's almost surprising that it's become the world's second largest economy. In terms of how it got there, John, you talk about how people who made the choice to go into China didn't have that future phase in mind. It was almost that short-term gain. Talk to us about how that's playing out into the complications we're seeing now.
Yeah, the companies that moved into China, when people say they were such boneheads, they should have known that they were going to turn over their IP and that China was stealing what made their companies special. They really didn't. Let's say I don't understand what the current situation was. If you were making a product, competing in the world stage, if you did not go into China and take on those risks, and your competitors did, and I saw that with Lucent Technologies. Lucent, if they hadn't gone in, but Ericsson and Alcatel and Nokia went into China, they'd be making their products at a third of the cost that Lucent was charging. Lucent would have been put out of business right away. So there was an urgency of going in. In retrospect, and this is always perfect hindsight, it's always 2020. What the world would have needed to do is say, anyone who makes their product in China can't sell in the US, can't sell in Europe.
It does seem one of the major turning points, if you will, or when the world woke up was the pandemic, when we realized that all of that offshoring and using China as the world's manufacturer spelled some troubles here at home when we were running out of PPE and other materials. Brad, what do you think was the biggest concern or issue that was spotlighted during the pandemic that the world was like, oh, wait, what did we do?
I was actually in China during the pandemic. And I actually sent PPE to China from America. Okay, so this to me wasn't such a big issue. It was about the Wuhan lab. And that's the issue that really caught my attention. And I think this is controversial, but my view on it is that America funded the lab partially, about $600K, and gave it legitimacy. So they were able to operate. And so America is complicit with the virus being let out. The Chinese, to me, are notoriously poor manufacturers. It was only a few years ago they finally were able to manufacture a ballpoint pen. They were not successful at copying Viagra. Okay, so I'm sure these guys in the Wuhan lab were not the most sophisticated researchers on the planet. And America made a mistake, right? That's my view on that time period. I mean, I didn't hear the CIA raising alarms about a virus flying in an airplane from China to America. I mean, where was the CIA, right? I mean, we spent $500 million to build the embassy in Beijing. What did the embassy do? So to me, there's a lot more questions about America's activity in China overall.
When it comes to solutions here, Brad, you have two main questions that you say everyone should be asking when it comes to solutions. The first one being, what should America's strategy be when it comes to China? So I'll let you answer that.
I think that the way America's been dealing with China from the very beginning, to me, is a little bit weird. If you have a balloon floating across America, America sanctions the balloon part manufacturers. If you find out that there's clothing in Xinjiang that's made by underage children, you sanction and you stop the clothing. If you have fentanyl, that's coming in, you try and close the borders with Mexico. So what America's been doing is they've been treating the symptom and not the problem. Okay, this is a huge issue. You need to have a strategy to deal with the underlying problem. If someone's losing hair because they have cancer, you don't buy them Rogaine, you try and cure the cancer. And so from my view, the strategy should be to delegitimize the leadership of the CCP, because they're the ones that are causing all these problems. They must change their behavior.
Well, I think Brad is right. We can't go treating this on a case-by-case basis the way you would in a typical business dispute. This is not business. Every time a leader, from the Republicans and Democrats both, every time a leader says strategic competitor, business competitor, fierce, they're missing the point. This is competition for China. This is more of a war. And so if a company steals the IP from an American company, you don't sanction the company that stole it. You say, okay, China, you can't sell those products anywhere else. We should have agreements with Europe. So, okay, we stole it from an American company, off our country too. All vendors, not just who did it, because it's all coming from the top.
Well, Brad Good, John Pelson, thank you both so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks.
That's all for today's China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. If you have any feedback on the show or have something you'd like to see us cover, send us an email at chinainfocus@ntd.com. We'd love to hear from you. For on-the-clock original news coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow.